Signed for big money and big dreams. But what happened to Fábio Vieira at Arsenal? Why did one of Portugal's brightest stars fade into the background under Arteta? Let's find out why. I remember the hype when we signed Fábio Vieira from Porto. I didn't really know him. Many Arsenal fans actually didn't know him, but we went to check out his YouTube clips. They were like, oh, Arsenal just signed this guy out of the blue for £34 million from FC Porto. He's supposed to be an attacking midfielder. And we're like, okay, let's go check him out. And when I saw the clips, I was outstanding. I was like, wow, this guy is quite good. He has very, very lovely passing range. He looked very exciting, in all honesty. With the quotes around him showing how Arsenal wanted him, and all of a sudden we got our guy. And this was the season we just came out from finishing in fifth place. That was the year that Smith Rowe shined well for us. 2021-2022 season. So obviously we're in the Europa League that year. We're going to need some additional level of depth. So getting Vieira was good. I was looking forward to the signing. He's a relatively unknown player. The way Arsenal swooped in for him was very swift. So we're like, okay, let's see what this guy has to offer. So you ask yourself, why did Arsenal buy Vieira? Well, first thing that comes to mind is his passing range, his vision, his creativity. He In the YouTube clips I watched, because I won't come here and act like I knew how the Portuguese league functions. I don't really watch that competition. It's only in the Champions League I get to see Portuguese players, mainly Porto, Benfica, Sporting CP. Yeah, I know a couple of more teams like Vitória Guimarães, Chelsea, Braga. For Football Manager, you know most of these teams as well. But I got to get a glimpse of Fabio Vieira playing for Porto, and I was very impressed. His passing range was excellent. I think in the season Arsenal bought him, he had created like 14 assists or some crazy amount like that, and it looked very impressive. Of course, Arsenal needed some depth to add to Odegaard. We had just completed the sign of Odegaard, and he was getting into his own in the team. Obviously, we needed to have like a backup, and since he was like playing the right hit position most of the time, Vieira was like the mold of the kind of replacement that you would get for him. They kind of had the same left foot. They were both technical players, very creative, and it made sense because you want to think about the tactics. Someone like Vieira was going to fit in a possession-based club like Arsenal, where we take some time out to pass the ball very well and all that. And it seemed like a very good signing, in all honesty. So if you ask yourself, why did Arsenal buy Fabio Vieira? Because he was going to fit into the profile of the team. He seemed like a player that Arsenal needed at that point in time to add reliable backup to Odegaard. Because obviously we're going to play so many games in the Europa League, as well as the Premier League, as well as the Carabao Cup, as well as the FA Cup. So we needed bodies. But the reality hit us hard. Fabio Vieira looked so lanky. He didn't have the strength to match up in the Premier League. He was easily bullied by opposition midfielders. He didn't basically meet the physical demands of the competition that he was signed to play for. And obviously, you cannot say that it was because of his size, because there are a couple of players that are also in the same frame, but they do better physically. But Vieira wasn't that type. And his impact defensively was very minimal. Vieira was someone that could not defend to save his life. When we are on the opposition press or during transition plays, he was nowhere to be found. He was not the kind of player that can be trusted to even put in a tackle and all that. And unfortunately, he struggled with tempo, especially in games that required urgency. Games where Arsenal were trying to, impact to either get a draw or try to win. When Vieira came into the pitch, he always had just this like a bicycle attitude about him, not coming into terms with what was required of him in the role. So it was a struggle. The reality of having him was very different from the expectation we had. Then there were the injuries, the groin injury, the surgery he had to go for. There was even the time when he even suffered a red card against Burnley. He never found his rhythm because he basically had a start-stop availability. One game you have Vieira, next 3 games he's gone. and stuff like that. So he could not even be relied upon to, play for the club. Even in games like weaker opposition games in the cup, he could not even dominate. He struggled for form badly. He was not the kind of player that you could even, rest Odegaard for, unfortunately. Another issue was that Odegaard was undroppable and he was also in good form. So because he was in good form, it was going to be very difficult to have Fábio Vieira play, and he struggled to get games. In the 22-23 season that he was bought for the club, Vieira started only 3 games, came in as a sub 19 times. In 23-24, it was even worse. Vieira started only 2 games in the Premier League, came in as a sub just for 9 times. And you can see that in 24-25, he was already gone. He went back to Porto, where he started 21 games for them and came out as a sub 5 times. So it was very evident that he was not a fit for us anymore. And the club was even trying to create a new pathway for a new left-footed right eight in Ethan Nwaneri. So in addition to selling Misfit to Fulham, Arsenal let Fábio Vieira go to Porto because he could not cut it in the team. In the double pivot, he could not play as a deep midfielder. He struggled. Arsenal always had Xhaka and Partey in that position while Odegaard was in the right eight or sometimes in attacking midfield. But Odegaard could actually come deep when required, try to win the ball and influence the game from there. But we couldn't have that with Vieira. And of course, he lacked the physicality and the pressing intensity that Arsenal required of him. He could not deliver that. And while he could not make the use of his opportunities, others stepped up. Folks like Smith Rowe, managed to play a couple of more games, even though he was struggling as well. Folks like Trossard even had to move into midfield to take a spot that Vieira was meant to have taken. And of course, more youngsters also had the same impact. So he didn't have a couple of games. He didn't have an extended run of games to show what he was made of. Yes, he scored that brilliant goal against Brentford when I think we won 3-0 or so. But he really struggled, I don't know whether it was a case of confidence, whether it was him being homesick, whether it was just the wrong move for him at that point in time. But we really struggled with Fábio Vieira. He couldn't give us what we expected of him. Right now, there are no plans for him. David Onsen tweeted a while ago, I think a couple of days back, that VfB Stuttgart is trying to sign him on a permanent basis. He played for Porto last season, got up to the point of the Club World Cup and played for them as well, but were eliminated in the group stages. But Porto didn't have the financial muscle to get him back, I guess. So I was not give him an extended break because of the CWC. But Moni Madueke also had an extended break in the CWC. But he played the nationals last game against Villarreal, while Vieira was nowhere to be found. And with this move to Stuttgart imminent, it's clear that his time with us is on borrowed time. He's about to leave. He had been linked with moves away from the club. At some point, I think Porto even tried again, but Arsenal didn't accept it or so. So what we're saying here is very evident that Vieira has no hope this season, and Arsenal looking forward to selling him to Stuttgart. Stuttgart will certainly not pay the 34 million pounds we paid for him, but if Arsenal can get like 20 million, I'm sure we'll just bite it off their hands and cut our losses with him. So before I go to the outro, where I talk about the lessons from Arsenal and Arteta regarding to a player like Fábio Vieira, I'll just do some Q&A. So let's go to the Q&A session. The first question comes from MC Moore, asking why was he signed. I think I spoke about that earlier. Arsenal needed someone that could be a backup to Odegaard, and the scouting network showed that he kind of fit that mold. So the club made a punt on him, bearing in mind that they felt that he was like another Odegaard. However, that didn't work out. So why did we sign him? Because we thought he could fit into our style, because we thought he was a bit identical to who we already had in the team, which was Odegaard. MC Benny says, why did we buy him only to sell him off yet again? He didn't do too bad with the numbers, did he? So let's review that. someone who scored right now. And what he says here was that in the 22-23 season when he was signed, he played 22 games in the Premier League, which was 3 starts and 19 sub appearances. He scored 1 goal and had 2 assists. In the Europa League, where he was very consistent, he played 8 games and had 1 goal, 2 assists. He played only 1 goal in the Carabao Cup, and that was pretty much it. So in like in like 31 games for the club in his debut season, he had 2 goals and 4 assists. That's quite poor. That's quite poor for an attacking midfielder, especially with the fact that the previous season he played 37 games for Porto and he scored 6 goals and created 14 assists. So that was the output that we were expecting, especially when it comes to the creativity. He didn't offer that. And in his second season at Arsenal in the Premier League, he had 2 starts and 9 appearances, which was 11 games, and he scored only 1 goal and had 2 assists. In the Carabao Cup, he made just 1 sub appearance, and in the Champions League, he made 3 sub appearances. And in those games, he did nothing. So his output was even worse in his second season compared to the first. But the difference here was that he played less games. Obviously, that had lost trust in him. So and of course, he also had some of those his injury issues as well that he struggled with. So Mr. Benny, I don't think his numbers were good enough. He was not good enough. He didn't live up to the billing. He didn't justify the 34 million pounds we paid for him. And Dukun says he really couldn't work for us. What did we see in him to start with? Why couldn't he work with us? So what we saw in him to start with was the fact that we thought he would be another Odegaard. We thought he'd be another good creative midfielder who will come around and strut his stuff for us. However, the expectation and the reality were two different things, and I'm afraid it couldn't work for us because he struggled to meet with the demands of the Premier League. He wasn't good enough, basically, to play for us. And the last question was from Blade. He says, should proper background checks on cultural and geographical adaptation be top burner when it comes to player recruitment? Um, Proper the background checks are always done. Obviously, Arsenal has a very good scouting team, one of the best in the world. But sometimes it's about taking that leap of faith, that punt on a player. There are some that work, there are some that don't. Look at Gabriel Martinelli, for instance. He came from Ituano. Ituano was in certain third or fourth division of the Brazilian league. But Edu, probably saw him play a couple of times and convinced Unai Emery at that time that he was going to be good enough. And in his first season for us, he scored 10 goals. A couple of seasons afterwards, he scored 15 goals. Although, no, right now, he's not basically showing the same type of output that we expect from him. But the point is that Arsenal took a punt on a relatively unknown Brazilian, and he has been established to become one of the biggest players in the team. If Arsenal wants to make a move to sell Martinelli now, he can gain us like 70 to 80 million pounds, you know. So that's just something that we need to bear in mind when it comes to background checks. Yes, the Premier League is a very, very taxing division. And as you're already aware, there are several clubs, several backgrounds that come into play when it comes to geographical adaptation. We have got players from Germany that did well, like Aubameyang, who came from Dortmund, and he was a beast for us. But in the same vein, the other players that we also signed that didn't work out well. So it's always like a 50-50 thing. Sometimes if you want to start, putting a bias on a geographical location for a player, then you might miss out on some talents. The same way you go to Brazil and find a, a gem, the same way you can go to the same Brazil and find a Marquinhos. So let me give you a comparison with a team like Brazil now. Okay, none comes to mind. When you think of players that came from directly from the Brazilian league to the Premier League, I'm thinking of any big name. I know most of the Brazilians actually left Brazil and went to Europe first before coming into the Premier League. But there's some Brazilians that have done well in the Premier League, but not everyone. So I think it's a very good question. But I don't think we should limit ourselves to, you know, having just background checks on cultural and geographic adaptation, because you might not necessarily get some talent that you want to because you've already put a bias on where you feel they can be from. So in conclusion, this was a big disappointment. Um, no one expected him to be this bad because he flopped. Even Arsenal were not even surprised, or were not even bothered to even fight to keep him when Porto came calling last season, because they even fancied having someone like Waneri ahead of him. So that's just what it is. I hope this move to Stuttgart materializes and we get some money for him. Right now, we're trying to sign a Iberichi Eze, and word on the street that we need to sell first. So anyone we can sell out to make sure we get the Eze move, I'm up for it. So bye Vieira, you won't be missed.